Good afternoon, everybody. A quick reminder to turn the mobile phones on silent. And this afternoon we have a beginner's class or presentation, all Node, no code. Please welcome Erica Bramham.
Thank you. I've sort of done my presentation in two parts, and I have a really comprehensive set of slides, but I've decided, because I've only got 45 minutes, I'm going to skip the first part of the slides because you can read them in your own time. And that's kind of an introduction to Drupal. And it's written in my own language, so there may be things that are not absolutely 100% correct, but it's sort of Drupal the way I understand it and the way that lets me build websites. But what I really want to do is get into kind of the meat of the presentation and show you how to build a few quick features. So I'm actually going to do it all live on the computer. So you can actually see that you can build a really functional Drupal website that's ready for you to theme without actually having to get into any PHP. So that's the kind of aim. And it's going to be really basic. So I think, I mean, if you've never built some Drupal websites before, then a lot of it might be familiar to you, but I'm just trying to introduce a bunch of modules and tools that I use all the time to actually build, you know, you can extend on the really basic stuff and you can build some really awesome things without ever having to write a tiny bit of PHP. So I might just tell you a bit about my background because I am not a web developer. I was working for a non-profit organisation, and like a lot of non-profits, they have people who do everything. So I ended up maintaining our Drupal website and just got more and more into doing Drupal, and then I set up a CiviCRM installation for us, which was an interesting learning curve. It was a bit of a nightmare, but I did learn a lot about just kind of making websites in general, and that you can do it if you're determined enough, except there's a lot of roadblocks in the way in terms of kind of shoddy documentation or just the learning curve in general. Like, there's a lot of jargon and terminology. So I think if there's sort of words that I'm using that you don't understand because you're really new to Drupal, just stop me and I will go through and explain them, because sometimes it can sound like someone's speaking another language when they're going on about nodes and taxonomies and stuff. All right, so hang on. I've kind of cheated a little bit, and I've already got the Drupal installation ready to set up. There's some really good documentation on Drupal.org about setting up a local installation of Drupal, so I'm going to let you go through that, and there is a link to that in my slides, which will be up on the Drupal website. So I'm actually just going to go through the very, very quick installation process. I've already created myself a database, and I'm going to do the minimal installation. And my database is called DDU Example Live. Is the password root? Yes. Yeah, it is. Yep. And I'm going to make the admin password admin just in case I have to log in for any reason. And I don't want email updates. So there you go. I've installed Drupal. That was really quick and easy. It takes a little bit longer if you have to set up some stuff on your computer, but it's not too hard. All right, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a little page feature. So because I've installed the minimal installation, there's kind of not really anything on my Drupal site. I don't have any content. I don't actually have any content types. So if I try and add content, there's no content to be able to add. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a page content type, and we've gone into structure content types, and I'm just going to call it page. And you can give it a description if you want. It's often good, especially if you're designing sites for clients, to give it a little description so they know what they're actually creating when they go to create a new page. I'm going to give it, just leave everything as default. And as you can see, I can't add any fields. That's because there's a little fields module that needs to be enabled. So I'm going to show you how to enable a module from the modules page, but for the rest of it, I'm just going to enable the modules using Drush, which is much quicker. And actually, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to enable a module called Module Filter so that it makes this modules page a bit easier to use. All right, excellent. Now I get a search box, so I can actually search through the modules list, which is really helpful. And I've got a list of kind of recommended modules in the slides as well. So I recommend going through it and just having a bit of a read and following the exercises as you go. So we want to enable field. So field module is actually enabled, but we don't have the field UI module. A lot of modules, they'll have their own user interface module. So even though you can use fields, you can't actually create them because the UI module is disabled. So now if I go back to my content type, I can actually manage fields. So we've got a title and it creates you a default body field, and I'm just going to leave that as is because that's all I really want. So one of the first things people ask how to do is how to override the default Drupal front page, which you feel like it should be an easy thing, but it's kind of, that was one of the things that really got me when I first started Drupal. I was like, how do I change the front page? And it took me about half an hour of reading through the documentation. Yes?
That's one really simple question.
Yeah, yep.
Just when you talked about fields,
Yes.
you're talking about placeholders that will hold content on
Yeah,
the finished
exactly.
site,
Yep.
and then you picked what sort of input the back-end person should have as
Yep.
well.
Well, yeah, so when you create a field, so say we've got our page, I mean, maybe I wanted to do like a page subtitle field, and I'd say that's just going to be a plain text field. So the content editor, they can only enter plain text. They can't put any, there's no WYSIWYG editor, there's no HTML. So they're just going to chuck the text in the field, and that's how it will output on the site.
So and in your page example, if you create a body, then you could pick a WYSIWYG editor.
Yep, you could, yeah. So I don't go into WYSIWYGs in this because that's a bit, that's kind of complicated. And, but there's decent documentation on all this sort of stuff. It's just a matter of finding it. And sometimes I find it's easier to just do a Google search and find someone who's written a really good blog post than, I don't know, the documentation is often a bit techie, and you kind of, you need to learn the Drupal dictionary before you can understand the documentation. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add new content, and it's going to let me create a page because that's the only content type we have. I'm going to make this page called home, and I'm not going to put anything in the body, and just leave everything else as default and save it. So if we actually go to the administration menu, and there's this little link called content, and that shows you all of the content on your site. So you can see here's our home page here. You've got a couple of options. You can publish and unpublish things. You can make things sticky. I don't know if you're familiar with forums, but sometimes they have sticky posts that stay at the top. So maybe you're ordering things by newest to oldest, but the sticky ones will always be at the top. So I'm going to change the front page. So I'm going to go to configuration and site information. And down here, we've got our default front page. And I know that it's node/1 because it's the first page that I've created, but you can just go to the URL of the page you've created and find out the path to it. And if the page doesn't exist, it won't let you save the form. It'll say that I can't find a page. And now if we go to home, this is our home page. So I don't know if you've installed a Drupal site, but when you get the default front page, it just shows you all of your content that's promoted to the front page, maybe 10 nodes. And that's, I mean, it's kind of useful, but most of the time you want to create a page with like some blocks and stuff and just make it a lot more custom than the stock Drupal installation lets you. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a really little news feature, and I have already partially prepared it using features, which I will need to enable. And I'm in the wrong site. So Drush is a really useful tool for just kind of quickly doing a lot of the admin tasks that you would normally have to navigate through the admin interface. It's a bit tricky to set up, but if you maybe grab a more senior developer and they can help you with setting that up, like Simon did for me about a year ago. So I want to enable features. And then if I go back to my website, so what I've actually done is this is kind of a tool that lets you package up little bits of configuration, which is really useful if you always, on all your sites, you have a news feature that you give your clients. So you can actually package up all the parts that make up that news feature and then enable it across a bunch of sites. It's basically the kind of easy, no-code way of making modules, but that's not really what this presentation is about. So all I've done is I've packaged up little partially completed features to make it a bit quicker to demonstrate. So what I've got is I've already got a news content type, but I want to add a couple of extra fields. So I'm okay with the title and body, but I think I want to add an image field, so we'll call it image. And you should always preface your fields with the name of the content type, because otherwise it can get very confusing when you start getting deeper into things. So I'm just going to call this news image, really standard. And I don't have any options to choose an image field because I've got to enable a couple of extra modules. So I'm going to enable the image module, which is going to enable both image and file because file's a dependency. So you can enable all these modules from the modules screen. And now if I select a field type, I can choose an image and then save it. And generally you can just leave most of this stuff as default. It's fairly self-explanatory when you go through the list of what all the settings do, like you've got maximum upload sizes and resolutions and things. You can enable a title field if you want to for some accessibility text, but just leaving everything as stock, and I'm going to save it. And now there's another really useful module that I'm going to enable called devel and devel generate. Except I think it's just part of So this one's really useful because I can actually go and generate a bunch of just dummy content, which means that you don't have to go in and like type a whole bunch of news articles just because you want to start doing CSS on that page. And always forget where this one is in the menu. Configuration, development, generate. And I'm going to generate some news nodes, maybe 20. So if I go back to my content screen, you'll see here's all my nice lorem ipsum news nodes. And they've got an image, which is kind of nice. So at the moment, we don't have anywhere to view our news, like we've got no link to the news page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a view. So I'm going to enable views module. And I think I need to enable views UI, which is going to enable views and ctools as well. So there are a couple of dependencies. And if you're on the modules page and you're trying to enable something that has a dependency, it won't let you enable it unless you enable the dependency at the same time. And if you don't have the dependency, it'll make you download it first. So I can create a view. So this is the kind of, like, views is the thing that I use all the time, and it's kind of confusing when you first use it. It's a really complicated interface, but once you get a couple of them down pat, you can see how you can easily just pull all of your data out of the database and display it exactly the way that you want it. So we're going to call this one news, and I'm going to show content of type news. And the Ajax is a bit funny. And I'm going to create a page. I'm going to call it news, and I'm just going to display an unformatted list of teasers. So teasers are just a little chopped off version of the larger node. And I'm going to create a menu link as well in the main menu and call it news. And the other thing I'm going to do is create a block. So a block doesn't have a page, but you can actually use your block on other parts of your site. So what we're going to do is we're going to create just a little grid that we can show the image and title of the next three, the most recent 3 news items. So we only want to show 3. And so this is kind of the views interface. I'm using Drupal 7, and for small sites, Drupal 7 is pretty awesome compared to Drupal 6. It's much easier to navigate around. The interface is kind of different. So if you're used to Drupal 6, it takes a little bit getting used to. But it's much easier for people who aren't developers or coders to actually get past the big learning curve. So I'm not going to do anything with my page display because it's kind of fine as it is. But what I want to do is I want to add an image field into my block display. So these are your two displays. And we've got our fields here. It's given me a title by default. And if we just find our image field, and I'm going to say I don't want a label, and I'm just going to leave everything else as default. So you can see that I've got a nice little preview down here, which is our, doesn't want to do horizontal scrolling. So this is the block that I've just created, and it's got the 3 most recent news posts. And if I go back to the page, you'll see this is what our page of, like our news page is going to look like. So then I save this, and it's given me this little menu link up here. So I can go to the news page. It's given me a pager down the bottom, which is quite useful. And then if I go to the home page, this is actually where I want to put my block, because I want users, when they come to the site, to see the most recent news. So the first way you can put a block on the front page, I'm going to show you another way later, but is just using the general Drupal blocks interface. So find our news block, which is down here, and I'm going to configure it. And I think I will put it in the footer. And then I'm going to show it only on the listed pages. And I want to show it on front. Normally you just put in paths like node/1 if you want to show it on node 1, but the front page is special because the front page can change. So you generally, most of the modules, you'll use this kind of front in brackets. And there's our block. Although it looks kind of ugly because these images are all different sizes. So one thing that we can do is create an image preset. So if I go to structure, nope. What do I need? No, I don't think I need that one. Hang on. Wait, that's the wrong website. Yes. There's quite a lot of admin menu modules that you can install that give you different toolbars and stuff. So I recommend having a look at them and finding one that works for you. There's also the kind of Drupal 7 little overlay thing, which I don't like, so I've left turned off for this. But clients seem to really like it for some reason, I think because it makes it look quite slick. So I'm going to add a style, and I'm going to call it news front. And maybe we'll put scale and crop and go 200 pixels by 200 pixels. So now if we go back to our view, and then we go to edit it, and then this image field in the block display, I'm going to say that the image style is news front. And maybe I'll also decide to link the image to the content, because a lot of the time users like to click on the image instead of clicking on the little tiny title. So there you go. It's kind of nice. There's extensions you can install for the image presets, which give you all sorts of things like rounded corners and color overlays. Yeah, you can do all sorts of really great stuff with, and so we've just got the one image attached to that node, and we can style it however we want. So that's it for the news. Does anyone have any questions at this point, just before I go on to the next bit? If I'm going too fast or bits you don't understand?
Is there any way you can browse? Sorry. Is there any way you can browse the modules really easily?
That's the module filter module. Kind of gives you this little browsy. Oh, do you mean on Drupal.org or on your site?
I find Drupal.org quite hard.
No, not really. I don't use the Drupal search because it's on Drupal.org because it's a bit crap. I just usually search with Google. Oh, okay. But that's searching for things in Drupal. You kind of, again, you need to learn the language a little bit so you know what to search for, because there's, yeah. Yep.
Sorry, I was just going to point out for you guys to check out DrupalModules.com. It's specifically an easier interface for searching and finding other modules.
Excellent.
And my hot tip for that terrible problem, that's a good one, DrupalModules.com, is also just using Google, going Drupal project and then describing the problem that you're trying to solve is a great shortcut for finding something. And, you know, let Google kind of use its PageRank to bring something to the top.
Yep,
and
that's
then
true.
you sort of Google around on that topic and see if there's any sort of conflicts around using that approach versus another. That's my general strategy.
The other thing is if you find a module that seems useful but not quite right, there's a little related projects thing on the module page down, I think in the sidebar, down the bottom. So that often has links to other similar modules which may be better suited. But yeah, it's often a matter of just kind of getting a few tools that are really working for you, and then you get to know Drupal and then you know what to search for. So I'm going to enable another feature, which is my blog, because everybody wants a blog. And I've already created the blog content type, and I've already partially created the view, so we've got a nice little link to our blog here, except we don't have any content in it, so I'm going to generate some.
If only generating content was always that easy.
I know, I know. Actually, I've missed a step. So what I actually really want to do with the blog is I want to be able to tag the content, because it's kind of keeps users on your site. If they can click around, they get related content. So I am going to enable taxonomy module. Taxonomy is one of the things that really confused me when I first started Drupal, because I had no idea what taxonomy meant, and the dictionary definition didn't really help me out. And then they talk about vocabularies, which just confused me even more. So it's kind of just the way that Drupal categorises content, and you create a vocabulary, which is a set of terms. So I could have my vocabulary as colours, and then you can have terms red, blue, green. So I'm actually going to create a taxonomy vocabulary. And if you've used Drupal 6, this is a bit different in Drupal 7 to the way they do it in Drupal 6. So I'm just going to call it blog tags. And that's all you have to do in this one, because I want this to actually be a free tagging, so the user can type in the tags as they're creating the blog post. But if you wanted to give them a set list of tags that they can choose from, you can add the terms with a nice description in there. So we'll go to our content type and manage the fields. And I will add a new field called tags. And then we've got our term reference field. And I want this one, which is the autocomplete widget tagging. And then I'm just going to leave everything as default, not worry, except I'm going to give it unlimited values so that they can enter as many tags as they want. So you can actually generate tags, which is useful when you're waiting for the client to give you their tags. Gosh, development. Except I want to generate terms. So I'm going to generate some terms, maybe 10 is fine. And then I'm going to generate some blog posts. I don't really want 50. All right, so I'm going to go into the view that I've partially created. And what I actually want to do is on the list of blog pages, I want it just to create a little drop down that lets the user filter by tags, which is quite easy. So if we go and edit our view, I've already got this page display which is showing the teaser. So you can see that's down here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new filter. So currently they're filtered by whether it's published, so only published nodes are going to show up, and the node type is blog. So what I want is I want my tags field. And maybe we'll make it a drop down. And then I'm actually going to tick this button that says expose filter to visitors. So that means that they will be able to see it at the top of the thing and filter themselves. And I'm also going to allow multiple selections so that they can filter by multiple tags. So now we've got our nice little drop down here, and I can select a couple, and it's probably going to return most of the content. Seems like it's not working, but I've tested this several times and always thought that it's not working. There you go, that's only showing a couple. So if we save this view and go to our blog page, so this is what the user's going to see, and they can filter by cost if they want to, and there's a couple of posts there. So that's kind of a really basic exposed filter. You can do all sorts of stuff, like you can have multiple exposed filters and create fairly useful sortable lists. There's also some nice modules that plug into it to make it a lot easier, like they'll auto-submit the filter for you and just give you little useful helpers, because out of the box it's not the most useful and user-friendly feature, but it kind of gets you part of the way there. Right. So that's all I'm doing for the blog, and the next thing I'm going to create is an image gallery. So I've already partly created this content type. And I've got a title, and I deleted the default body field because I didn't want it, and I've added this little text description field. And I'm going to add an image field. Except this is different to the other image field because I'm going to allow the user to upload as many images as they want. So what we're creating is a gallery with multiple images, so then you'll be able to browse through the galleries or go into the gallery and see all of the images associated with that gallery. So we're going to change the number of values to unlimited. And you can always set it to 10 or something if you don't want the user to be able to, you know, create 50 million images. But so if we go to our views, I've got two views that I've created here. The first one is a page. So this is just a page of all of our galleries. And to make it look a bit nicer, what I want to do is I want to show the first image of each gallery as a field. So I will add a field in here. And you just have to make sure you grab the right image field because I've got a couple of them. And it's this one. I don't really want a label. And I'm going to link my image to the content. And there's this little thing called multiple field settings. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to display one value starting from 0. So it's just going to show the most recent item because that's the way that I've got my views sorted. But you could kind of say that you want to show a random item, or you want to show the first item that was ever uploaded, and then you can get into more advanced things and maybe let the user choose which gallery image that shows on the front page. So if I save this one and go to our galleries page, we don't have any content. So here we have our image galleries. And I've just set this up as a basic grid view, so 3 across. And then once you've done that, you can like add some image presets if you want them all to be nice square thumbnails so it all lines up nicely. And if we go into here, this is kind of, doesn't look very attractive in our actual node view. We've just kind of got the description and then all the images getting dumped out like that. So I actually want to do the same thing with my images, and I want to have them in a nice grid as well, just to carry on the grid theme. So I've created a second view. And this is when views is going to get a little bit more complicated. And I've got this one called Gallery Images. So the thing that I'm going to do is go to the Advanced tab, which already makes you feel like it's going to be complicated, but it's actually not too difficult. So I'm going to add this thing called a Contextual Filter, and they used to be called arguments, but I think Contextual Filter is a better name for it because that's kind of what it's doing. We're filtering by a context, and what I want to do is I want to grab all of the images that are associated to the node the user is viewing. So they're viewing, like, I don't know, they're viewing my Morocco gallery, and I only want the images that they've uploaded in that Morocco gallery instead of every single image that's been uploaded to every gallery. So there's this filter called Content node ID. This one, content NID. So every piece of content has a unique ID. It's just a little number. So you kind of, the first piece of content you ever create on your site is 1. And even if you delete that, nothing else is ever going to get assigned that number 1. So we're going to provide a default value, and we're going to go with the content ID from URL. And that's all we're going to do for now. And I might just uncheck display record count with link. Maybe? No, I'm not even going to bother doing that. So that kind of, like, that's the bit that's really complicated about views when you get into the contextual filters, because it starts looking like you're dealing with PHP and like crazy database things. But that one, node ID from URL, is really useful. And even if you don't use any other contextual filters, you'll probably use that one quite a lot. So I'm going to save this. And I'm actually also going to add my image field in here. And because we've got multiple fields, like multiple values within this field, what I actually want to do is untick this display all values in the same row. And it should give me a nice grid. And it's got the image label, but we'll just leave that on there for now. So what we've got is a block, but our block's not appearing anywhere except for in the views interface. So I'm going to enable a really useful module called Display Suite. And this is one thing that I really, really like about Drupal 7, because editing the way that the node displays was really, it kind of seemed complicated to me, because you had to open up a template file and do some, write some code in there. But with Display Suite, you can get heaps of control over the way the node actually displays. So I'm going to manage the layout of the image gallery. And I'm going to click this one, and I'm just going to select one column. And so this is going to override the default Drupal layout and let us choose exactly which fields we want to enable. So I only want the title and the description, and I'm going to leave all these other fields like the author and post date disabled, because I don't think that the user really cares about them. They just want to see the pictures. So we'll save this. And then this thing is actually quite cool. So we're going to add a custom field and add a block field. And this is where we're going to actually add that little block which we created with the grid of images. So I'll call it gallery. I can actually give it a human readable name, so gallery images. And the entity is a node, because we're not dealing with taxonomy or users. And layout will say show only block content, because I don't really want to see the title. And the block that I want to show is all the way down the bottom. It's this one, view gallery images. So you actually have to enable the field after you create it. So we'll chuck that up there and save it. And then if we go and have a look at one of our galleries, that one's not very good because it's only got one image. But you'll see that we've got our nice grid sitting underneath the description. And if we kind of compare that to the news, this is our sort of default Drupal layout. So you've got the title submitted by admin on the date, and then kind of the text, and we've got our image down the bottom, which you can edit. Oh no. Does anyone have a long Mac extension cable? Ah, excellent. Quick. That's all right. I'm on the last 2 minutes of my thing, so. All right. So if we go to our node type, and the other thing is Drupal 7 seems to have changed node type to content type, and so now there's kind of this nodes and content are being referred to throughout the throughout Drupal 7, which they both mean the same thing generally, because it's still an NID instead of a content ID. Whereas in Drupal 6 it was all nodes. So if we click this Manage Display link, you'll see we get a similar interface, and I can actually choose to hide the label of the image. And if I want to, I can change my format to, say, I don't know, medium. So that's another way of managing the way that the nodes are viewed, but you have much less control than if you start playing around with Display Suite. So there we go, medium format with no label. The other thing that I want to show you, the very final thing, is a module called Context. So Context can do a lot of stuff, but the thing that I use it for most is laying out sections of the site. So say you've got a gallery section of your site and you want to have a specific block that only shows in that section, then you can create a context that only shows the blocks in there. But what I actually want to do is I want to move the location of this menu. So I'm actually going to go to blocks first and find our main menu. Which seems to be disabled. Oh no. Where has it gone?
You're right there.
No.
It could be primary links in Garland.
Oh, it is, that's right, it's in the theme. So, there you go. The themes control some things. There we go, main menu. That's one of the other things that confused me when I first started out, because generally you can control things from the blocks, and then there's just certain things like site name and site slogan are displaying. If you want to turn them off, it's a little bit tricky to figure out how to do it. So my menu has disappeared, and obviously I've been having issues with context not actually getting enabled. Oh, it does too. Thanks, helpers. Still don't know why you're at this talk. Oh no, those are, you know.
I'm going to cry now.
Oh no. All right, now we should have, oops, context, excellent. So this has got kind of a nice easy interface. I'm going to call it blocks site-wide, because I want this to show on all sections of the site, no matter where you are. And then there's this little site-wide context, which is always active. And then we're going to add a reaction, which is a block. And we're going to add our main menu, and maybe I'll just chuck it in the header, which is somewhere different. And you can see now our menu's moved up here. So there we are, built 3 pretty simple features, but that's kind of the starting point. So now you can add more fields, start theming. I don't know if any of you are kind of familiar with like WordPress or just straight HTML theming, but it's kind of, Drupal gives you a lot of little helper classes that help the theming, but it's can be a bit daunting knowing where to put your CSS. So if I go to Finder, 5 minutes, all right, excellent. I'll just quickly show you this one thing. Whoa, that's not, I don't know what that is. Obviously it wants to open things in TextEdit. Oh, goodness, this is a brand new computer and I'm still getting my head around it. Okay, so we have our site, and this is the sites directory. This is the one you go to most of the time, and then sites all themes. And I've got a couple of contrib themes, and one of the ones I've got is Zen, which gives you a starter kit, so you can kind of use that as your base theme. And I might enable it on the site just so you can see quickly what it looks like. It's pretty ugly, but it gives you just kind of a blank slate and is a good place to start from. So if we go into the starter kit, and generally the CSS is where you chuck all your CSS. So Zen gives you heaps of style sheets by default. And maybe if we open up pages.css, so kind of you can override those in your sub-theme, but it's not really a topic for this presentation. So I'll really quickly show you how to change the theme. Yep, and then we can have some questions. So let's go with Zen. So we're just going to enable and set default. And there we have a nice blank slate ready for your excellent design and CSS. All right, questions? Nothing.
Great.
Oh no, there's one up the back.
You were saying at the beginning of the presentation that you were working at a non-profit, and then they, you had to wear many hats.
Yeah.
What do you think the biggest pain points were for, at that, going from there to going to where you are now and that learning experience?
I think it was interesting because I was working at this non-profit and I was just the one doing the website. If I couldn't figure out how to do something, I'd just make a judgment call that it wasn't worth figuring out how to do it and and move on to another task. Like if you really wanted to, if they really wanted you to change the label of a field to something and you couldn't figure out how to do it, you just say, no, it's going to stay whatever the default is. And then kind of when you have proper clients and then they want you to change it and they're like, well, you have to change it. That's when it becomes difficult because you have to work through that and figure out how to change things. So I think that was probably the biggest learning curve when I stopped kind of being the IT go-to person and actually starting making Drupal websites.
Just you mentioned a few times separating like context module versus context UI. What's the reason that you'd only have the context module installed? Like, is there another way to access that functionality?
Sometimes you'll kind of turn it off on a production site because you don't need, the user doesn't need to see that. They'll kind of only want to see it on their development version. And also, it depends on what sorts of permissions you're giving the users, but maybe, you want to still have the context there, or maybe you're defining some stuff in code that you really want to keep away from the general users.
More questions?
Thank you. I think that was awesome. Someone tweeted we should have had that talk at the beginning of the conference.
Yeah.
Who agrees with that? Yeah. It's just perfect and a perfect introduction to setting up all that sort of stuff. And even Simon here said he learnt something, so that was really good. But I'm actually really fascinated in the shift from this was just the thing I did at my job, and now I actually do Drupal for a living. Have you taken Dimitri's step and contributed something yet?
I did. I wrote a sort of a patch for CiviCRM once, but it wasn't really a patch because I didn't know how to write a patch. I just put the code in the issue queue and said this was useful to me. But no, my contribution is usually writing in issue queues and kind of, if I find a bug, then I'll kind of report it and then keep on reporting. If no one replies, you keep on saying, well, actually, it's not to do with this, it's to do with this, and then that's generally my contributions. Yeah, which is still useful because it helps other people. And if you kind of post your question in such a way that it's useful to other people who are having the same problem, then hopefully you're helping out all the other people who are struggling with the exact same things that you are.
It's a great example of how different people have different fields of interest. So there's not just the Dimitris that make up the community, but there's also the Ericas who do a presentation like this because, so one thing I notice is I present the same thing in training, and I've noticed like 90% of the stuff Erica said, I'm like, oh, I should say it like that. that makes so much sense. I go on about nodes and I flower it all up and I'm just taking these little bits and pieces. So that, that's just another form of contribution, isn't it? So it's no different, really.
Oh, and actually there was one last thing that I was going to show you, and this is a really small Drupal 7 website that I made for my music. And there's pretty much no PHP in this website at all. It's kind of, I think the only thing I did was I wrote a little custom formatter to wrap around this YouTube video, to embed the YouTube video, because the media modules were just, after I've been to that media presentation now, and now I understand why I gave up. So yeah, so this is kind of just, it's got some events. I have no shows. It's probably going to be really slow actually because the network. It's got a little about section with an image gallery. It's got kind of a static bookings page, and it's got a blog with tags. And this stuff is all just views pulling out things, like pulling out the latest blog entry, grabbing the latest video that's been linked. And yeah, so that's a really nice functional small website. I think that probably took me about a week and a half to design and build. So yeah, just using all of the modules that I've just demonstrated, and probably not, I don't think I've installed many extra ones. It's kind of the core set that I use for most of my stuff. And
that's great. I think that concludes our
that's all I've
afternoon. Give Erica a warm applause for